Saludos, Gabriel Morales presente otra vez. Gabe Morales here to bring you a little more overview of MA members over the past 60 plus years. Today, we're going to finish off the G last names. And just for your information, I went over the rest of these again yesterday with an individual who is probably considered to be the best debriefer ever in the California Department of Corrections. But before I do so, first let me relay a little mensaje or message, as I often do at the beginning and end of my videos. I get it. Some people never heard of me and naturally will challenge my credentials. I can tell you as humbly as I can that I acquired my knowledge relayed on this channel during a 30-year plus decorated career. And even before that, I grew up around these kind of guys. I had family members who were incarcerated, friends who were incarcerated, who used drugs and alcohol and got caught up in that negative lifestyle. So when people say that I don't know anything or I ain't shit, I kind of laugh. Yeah, that could be. Or maybe they just don't know much about me. Google me, por favor. Just do it. I'm all over the internet. I'm not hard to find at all. I don't wear a mask or try to hide my agenda. I was the founder of the International Latino Gang Investigators Association. Look them up also. Over my career, I taught for and met regularly with gang units all over the United States. When I worked in CDC, I was personally tasked with escorting Joe Morgan into the Violence Control Unit right after this picture was taken, as well as Blue Norris, shown here. These two were considered, at least at one time, to be the number one guys for the MA and for the AB. And I think I was chosen for a reason. My bosses knew that I knew how to talk to these guys respectfully, and that I always used proper force, if necessary. My mentor, the founder of the Prison Gang Task Force, arrested Joe Morgan 3 times. So I think I know a little bit about him and about the Mexican Mafia. There are some people who act like it is they who are the final decision makers, like they're on the mesa or something, about who is made or who is not made. I will tell you without shame, I am not perfect. Sometimes I get it wrong or have been fed misinformation, but I do my research based on evidence, not just rumors. So I feel confident that I'm relatively accurate. Over the bulk of my career, I had direct access to or via third party to practically every major gang intel database in the United States. When I first started this series, I verbally stated that all individuals that I mentioned appeared on my radar over 40 plus years of tracking gangs due to my personal firsthand observations, or they were pointed out to me by law enforcement and corrections intel units. In other words, they appeared on a list of members according to certain criteria. The California model of gang validation is the most commonly used in the United States and the one that I used and developed when working in CDC, Washington State, and when I supervised federal detainees and staff as a shift lieutenant commander. These general criteria areas are self-admission, gang-specific tattoos, which is why a lot of times I show guys with MA on them or Black Hand, which everybody knows in California and in the feds, you cannot have unless you are a member. If you do, you will be dealt with severely. Possession of gang symbolism, such as drawings with black hands or Mexican Mafia coded art, which is not hard for me to read. Intelligence documents, such as debriefs, court records, where individuals are accused of being members and convicted in court, where gang-related crimes are mentioned, pictured in group photos with other members or camaradas, documented association with known gangsters, whether it be out on the street or inside, contacts with made members, such as via mail, phone calls, etc., confidential informants. Now, I'm one of the first ones to admit informants can be very manipulative. Sometimes they will have personal agendas. So I treat this information with a grain of salt. It has to be collaborated by other sources. The individual appears on a membership list or roll call of known prison or street gang members and verified by other agencies. Like I said, occasionally I get it wrong, and so does CDC and the BOP. But usually they're pretty accurate because we are all supposed to be using the same basic validation criteria. I also will sometimes refer to the media, but again, I'm very cautious there. Some investigative reporters, like my good friend Chris Blatchford, will soon be speaking in El Monte with plenty of police security, are better than others. But even then, I always verify the info, not just take verbatim, because most have never worked in this business. Now, before we get into the program, you should know that some cops and guards have also been very critical of my work. They say that I let you guys know too much about what is known about you and these criminal organizations that you may belong to. So that is a risk I take. As I've said many times, I avoid putting out any highly confidential intel. Most, if not all, of what I put out is well known in the gang world, on the calles and in the pintas. I hope that this all makes sense. I'm trying not to sound defensive, and I don't like repeating myself or tooting my own horn. But some people either didn't get the message in prior episodes or just plain don't want to hear it. Hey, you are free to tune out if you don't like my channel. But if you do, thanks again for watching. First, we'll start off with Raymond Gonzalez, known as B. Gray, who was from Madera. He had a C number and was MA in the 1980s until at least 2004. There is also Ruben Indio Gonzalez from Banning. Now, I was asked about this guy. I know that he had a D number and was born in 1948. So was considered an elder and was MA, I believe, in the 1980s through 90s. I do believe that he was cellies with Raul Weddlesherm Leon at Pelican Bay, but to be honest, I didn't have time to do a lot of research on him. Perhaps I'll get into those guys. They're in the far eastern part of Riverside County that are not talked much about. And other places in the Yucaipa Valley, like Beaumont, and also do an episode even out past Palm Springs, into Indio, Coachella, and places way out there. There was David Gonzalez Contreras, also known as Gordo, from Reseda. I believe he did some federal time as well as CDC time. And Isho was indicted on a RICO case in the mid-90s. There was Eduardo Gonzalez Gallego, known as Lalo. He was from San Diego, Logan Heights. He had an E number as well as a federal BOP number. In Isho, he was released in 1998. There was Rudy Gonzalez Sanchez, known as Trampa, from Brole. He had a C number and was born in 1959. I showed that he is a former MA member that was incarcerated on the 3 strikes and at one time was housed in Corcoran. There was Adolfo Caballo Gonzalez from the Cincuentas. He had a C number and I believe was MA in the 1980s through 90s. There was Robert Bobby Gonzalez from San Diego, who had a D number. He was MA in Corcoran in the 1990s, and Isho also was incarcerated at Ironwood State Prison in 2012. I'm sorry, but I didn't have time to look up these guys' latest locations. I've been a little under the weather and trying to finish off the G's, as I know a lot of you guys have been patiently waiting. There was Alento Gonzalez from Mid-City Stoners. He had P number 42084, was documented as an MA member at Corcoran. I do have quite a bit of information on Rafael Cisco Gonzalez Munoz. He was a major player in La Puente and was associated with the Aryan Brotherhood when he was in CDC and indicted on a RICO case in 2002. He was housed in San Bernardino from 2002 to 2005 and then moved to Marion in 2005. He aligned with Perico Rocha in a war against Maria Yantada, who was the common law wife of Jacques Padilla. And I understand that Maria actually put out a hit on those two. So it was a big war that affected the streets. Cisco then was brought back to the LA Metro Detention Center in 2011 to 2012 and sentenced to life without parole in 2013. Last I checked, he was held at Big Sandy. William Anselmo, a.k.a. Willie Bobo Govedea, was from Redondo. He is an old-time Emero who was very active in the 1970s, as seen here with Champ and Dangerous Dan de Avila. He then was charged with the first wave of Mexican Mafia members that were sent to the feds, including Champ, and he was involved in the 187 of Thomas Trejo at Lompoc with Champ on November 11, 1978. After that, he was moved out to Leavenworth and also housed at Lewisburg. He was released in 2012, came back, and then released again in 2018. The word I have is he is now retired in good standings, as he never debriefed and put in enough work that I think the Carnales are going to leave him alone. Next, I'm going to get to the Grajedas. There's a lot of them, so I'm only going to cover some of them. I believe there was Adolfo, there was Arthur, a.k.a. Little Shady, there's Kathy, who I believe was Wino's wife, there was Jesus, known as Papus, there was Mona, who I think is either sister or married to one of the Grajedas. There may have been a William/Bill. Not sure if he's related to them by blood or by marriage, but I show he was at Pelican Bay in 2004 and was one of the guys trying to get these guys out of the SHU program. So I don't know if he's legit or just a writer. There's Raul, a.k.a. Casper. Now let me get into a little more detail on the main 3. First, Daniel Cuate Grajeda had committed multiple murders on the streets and inside the Pintas. I showed that he killed Gilbert Ruiz on October 2nd, 1979 for dissing Carlote Amador's wife. He was active at San Quentin. Cuate was hit by Indio Carlos in 1990 in the LA County Jail gang module and very active at Pelican Bay when it opened. He was also active at Corcoran. He was very involved in his own private business where he sold art. It was called Road Gents Incorporated. He was close to Aryan Brotherhood shot caller John Stinson. Cuate also was involved in a murder plot against Governor Wilson. Understand that he tried to move on Dash and D Castrillon at Pelican Bay before Darrell was released to the Calles. Cuate was involved in the C facility split and aligned with Angel Stump Valencia versus the D facility faction of the MA. After Joe Morgan died, Cuate viewed himself as being one of the main guys that should be considered the overall godfather for the Mexican Mafia. Even though such a post does not exist, Joe was considered the number one guy by most people I know that are prison gang experts. But his status and control was fought over by other individuals also, besides Cuate. These were individuals like Topo Peters, Tupi Hernandez, and even Artie Guzman. Topo's faction probably came out on top, but not without collateral damage. One of those being Boxer Enriquez, was one of Topo Peter's right-hand man and influencers in the MA, finally had enough, hang up the gloves, and dropped out. You also had Cuate's twin brother, Tomas, known as Huayno. He had a C number and a V number. He was involved in the MA during the 1980s and on, and had his own war at Pelican Bay with Babo Castellanos of Florencia 13. Huayno also was held at Corcoran Shoe and had some issues over tax collections and control out on the streets with other MA carnales. Understand that he was housed in Corcoran in 2020 with his brother Cherillo. Zenon, also known as Cherillo or Chelido, Grajeda Grande, is the third influential brother and was influential in CDC in the 1980s. He had a B number that he got after committing a robbery in 1976. He paroled in 1980, then came back to San Quentin in 1985 and paroled again. He caught a murder beef in 1986 and was housed at CIM, but Aisha only did about 5 years on that beef. He paroled in 1993 and then caught a firearms charge, which sent him to the feds. He was held at various facilities there, including Coleman, where I taught for the BOP, and Aisha was released from the BOP in 2010. He then came back into the LA County Jail in 2012, and as I stated just prior, then was held with his brother Tomas, aka Huayno, at Corcoran. Albert Beto Godino is a longtime Mexican Mafia member. He comes from Primera Flats and had an A number, 90446, that he copped on a dope case in 1965. I show that he had several escapes over the years and was eventually sent to Leavenworth, I think on a bank robbery. Don't quote me on that. He then was sent to Marion and paroled in 1975. He hit the Calles again, and due to his long-term drug addiction, committed another bank robbery in February 1988, where he was sent back to the feds. He then paroled in 1997 and then came back to the feds again. He was released in 2004, but then went back to the feds and was housed at one time at the ADX with Champ from Hazard, Topo from Florencia 13, and other MA Carnales as seen here. One thing about Beto, as with a lot of these guys, he was very much into art. The MA, as well as the NF, often study Aztec and Mayan, Toltec, and other Mexican Native American cultures, and they'll incorporate this art into their drawings and tattoos. Beto took on the Aztec name Tecpatzin, which means knife in Nahua. And like I said, he was known as a very good artist and often would code things into his art, as seen here. Roy, a.k.a. Güero Guerra, was from Bolen Parque. He had a B number, and Aisha was MA in the 1970s and was hit at San Quentin in July 1974. My understanding is he dropped out after that. Billy Giant Guerrero was from Isla Riva. He had a J number and was MA by at least 2004. Raymond Cabezon Guerrero was from El Hoyo Maravilla. He had an A number and a B number and was one of the first MA members documented. I show that Cabezon committed 2 hits when he was incarcerated, as well as got stabbed himself. There was a Ernie Listo Guillen from Lomas, South San Gabriel. I don't know a lot about him, but I show that he was documented Mexican Mafia at one time. There was Richard Apache Gurule, evidently Anthony, and may have also gone by Capone. I'm not sure about that because I have several Gurules that are involved in Mexican Mafia biz. Let me know if you know which one I'm talking about. The one I'm talking about was shot while collecting taxes after Buckethead Bustamante fell off and he took over that territory for collections. Evidently, he hit a major drug dealer's business and then extorted him at his house. I was told this guy ended up hiring the Mongols as security. There was a big shootout by the Mexican Mafia team including Gurule and a couple camaradas. One of the camaradas was shot and Gurule was killed. This did not go over well, as the MA ordered retaliation, forced the drug dealer owner out of the house, but that wasn't enough. They still burnt down that house. There is also another Gurule who may have been the father, who is pictured here with a large black hand over his heart. He ended up overdosing in the Bureau of Prisons on November 24th, 2006, and dying. Let me know what you heard about the Gurule family, so to help me sort some of these guys out, because I got a whole bunch of them. There was James Chemo Gutierrez from El Monte Flores. My understanding is he ordered multiple hits on Norteños, and that he hit Sammy Negro Villalba, Huero Sherm, after Negro disrespected Rup Soto when Negro got drunk and slapped him across the face, which is a big no-no. I'll put out the reglas at the end of this series, but one of them is never strike another carnal. Jimmy Gutierrez was housed at Victorville, as well as recently in Butner facility. He's scheduled for release in 2027. Richard, a.k.a. Black Rick Gutierrez, is from Carnoga Park, Alabama. He had an N number at one time and went to CRC in 1978. He got out and committed some robberies and came back with a C number. I show that he was at CIM in 1980. He went to the California Conservation Center in 1981 and paroled in 1985. He then came back in 1990 and was processed again at Chino, which at that time was still the major reception center for Southern California. He committed a bank robbery in 1992, whereby he was sent to the Polk, Lompoc, in 1993, and was released in September 2003. I show Robert Bobby Gutierrez from East LA. I don't have a lot of information on him, but I show that he was MA at one time. Let me know if you know who I'm talking about. I'm not sure if he was East LA Dukes 13 or another barrio in East Los. There's Vincent Chente Gutierrez, who I also have down as just East LA. He had a couple B numbers and was MA in the mid-70s. He was out by 1982 and then committed a murder in 1991, whereby he acquired an H number. Again, I wasn't able to check the current locations of these guys in CDC Inmate Locator, but I believe he got out at least by 2021. And finally, we have Arthur Artie Guzman from King Cobras. I'm probably going to have to do a solo episode on Artie. There's just way too much to cover here. Artie was just a youngster when he was recruited by Mundo Mendoza to take out the husband of a bail bonds lady who was working for La M and getting a lot of canales out of jail. Her name was Helen Mrazek. I'm not sure why. I think for the insurance policy, but she wanted her husband Bob out of the way. So I understand that Mundo's own brother Angel drove Artie to the house, whereby he killed Bob in his garage while he was still working on a vehicle. You can see him here on that little rollerboard mechanics use to go underneath cars. And he was given several headshots in the face as he rolled out to see who it was. After that, Artie took off, but was soon identified. Artie was tried, convicted, and it also sent Joe back to prison on this crime, as well as several other crimes, which got Joe federal time. And then after he's done with that, he returned to CDC until he died of cancer in the early 90s. I understand Artie's sponsor was Daniel Spider Arriaga. Usually it takes two, so I'm not sure who the other sponsor was. Let me know if you know who that might be. I show that Artie was arrested in November of 1977 and hit CDC in the early 80s. He was housed at Folsom in 1986 and acquired more and more power. He started taxing multiple areas out on the calles after the Emma Edict came out, and he had a war versus Victor Acuna. At one time, Artie controlled most of Corcoran for the MA, as well as several tax barrios out on the streets. He also controlled other pintas below Salinas Valley State Prison. Most people tell me he ended up becoming too greedy, and for that, the rest of the Canales conspired against him, and he finally folded and has been housed at Richard J. Donovan for the last few years. And so, that's all I have for the G's. I know that's a lot of information, and I went pretty fast, but like I said, I will probably break down some of these guys into longer episodes in the future. I hope you learned something new, and once again, I appreciate your respectful inquiries. Thanks once again for all my loyal subscribers, and I hope you have a very blessed day and happy 16 de septiembre. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.
When you're